Okay. Well, I hopefully you heard that. That means
Yeah.
it's recording now. So we can, no problem, it can hear um our chit chat and our conversations anyway. And the AI part will fill in the gaps from
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah,
no
totally.
problem. Yeah.
Totally. So our end topic for today, designing from the emergence, centering voice, disability, and the inclusive tech. Now to start off, like what I what can you say about the topic designing from the emergence? Like what does this really mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I I was thinking in a way that it's actually like a two-way street as well. It's from comes from the margins, what you need to know, and what gets built is meant to go back to the margins in a way if you're talking about technology. So, it is from and back to the margins, let's say. So it's in a way a dialogue between the people that matter, the people's needs that need to be heard and understood, and those who may have the expertise to create something to address that or help. So I think actually sometimes it is this sort of two-way thing that has to happen and flow and make sure that we're focusing on the right needs. Um, but also, I think it always makes me think that it's about always seeing, identifying, and specifically seeing and reaching people who are underserved or overlooked, which could be for various reasons. So if you were building something with tech, the problem is that maybe they're thinking about the marketplace and or they have a mindset that doesn't allow them to truly see, hear, or understand others that are different. It might be just ignorance, or there might be some a lack of real understanding. So some people may be aware, but then they'll of the margins and the importance of them, but they may block themselves because they don't quite understand or they don't know how to reach them or they think they that this is not going to help their business plan. Um, and so, like I say, it means a lot of different things. And that get in the way, of course. I think the main thing is the differences of other people has to have to be made more seen, heard, and understood. And because if you're going to create something, you really should be thinking of everybody as much as possible. The other point, though, is if you're designing from the margins, it could well be that it's more specific for them, which is more my tendency. There's already enough people like Microsoft and Google who cover all the big mainstream. But in terms of specifically targeting benefits to those people, it's about being able to understand them in their own ways, allow them to express themselves in whichever way works for them, and make sure that you also know what's on make sure you're doing this on their terms, that you can learn and listen because they get the chance to express themselves on their terms. And that's how you can establish, a participatory approach, if you like, to truly allow people to participate. Um, I think that there's so much innovation going on, although it's serving all those big mainstream audiences with things like AI and um, things like XR and virtual reality. But all this should also be equitably reaching everybody. Nobody should be left behind. And when you think about it, some of these things could exponentially benefit marginalized audience, have a lot more impact on their lives than on the usual crowd. That might be for good, it might be for bad. It's quite important to know. But I think that's a key reason why in the innovation space it really matters, because its impact is that much more on people in those margins.
Well, I totally agree with you on that, and it got me thinking why as at this stage in tech that we still see this gap in looking at marginalized communities or let's say marginalized people, because most time like tech does not really most tech is not inclusive, and even the ones that are trying to build an inclusive um, products, they find it hard with funding, and this is really taking us 10 steps back. And yeah, I totally agree with your comment there. And I also want to ask, like, with your wealth of knowledge and your experience in accessibility, inclusion, how has that shaped your vision for what truly inclusive tech should look like and should also feel like?
Yeah, it's really important. I think one is the the type of experience, like it's the lived experience, of course. And but also like I'm fortunate in that somehow my my needs led to building tech expertise. So combining the two has been really important. Um, but in terms of like seeing it from one's own lived experience, it does give you a different perspective, a much bigger drive than it would perhaps for others. So I think like matching up both the lived experience side and the tech expertise gives a lot of unique insights that, say, other tech people couldn't bring, um, because it's being able to really see in a whole different way than most people might, or think in a different way. And it leads to being able to be very empathetic in terms of who you want this to benefit, um, because you're living it yourself. There's a very itch to scratch, a big drive that kind of allows you to bring more to the game than others might. And sometimes it's helpful for just coming out with more different out of the box type of ideas that others may not have thought of. Being a neurodivergent, autistic, and ADHD, there's a lot we discuss around the idea of different thinking, bringing different perspectives and innovation to these things. Um, but for sure, the turning point that got me thinking much more about this was my daughter, of course. Um, you know, she's She learns in her own way. She defies all assumptions that people might have, like they may struggle to presume competence simply because she doesn't speak in language in a way that they might recognize. And they see this as perhaps, um, they might come up with the assumption that she doesn't have intelligence because they can't recognize it in the normal sense. So it's challenging to people who have these mindsets over time that you're supposed to speak very well and articulate and read and write in order to communicate intelligence. And that's completely wrong. These are just tools. Other people have other ways to express themselves. And that's a huge like change to think about. So for people, speech, for instance, the way you speak or don't speak, or how you say things or not, for many people, it's essential because that's something they take so much for granted as a sign of normality or intelligence. And when they see or hear something unexpected, it's really difficult. So they reach for mistaken assumptions. So we need to change that. And that's, it was her who was, showing her intelligence in her own way. She taught herself to use tech, and she taught herself to swim. And that's because her motivation is very different and focused on her interests. And no one else taught her these things. So tech is one of the few things in her life that she feels in control over, whereas nothing around her does she understand. So, but this is something she can control with her own will, and that's quite essential. So seeing those sort of things meant a lot in terms of um, giving people that opportunity to have some control, some autonomy through mastering something like tech. Um, and it does mean, though, that tech should be just serving you. It should be, adjusting to your needs based on your interactions, what it gets to know about you, how you prefer to interact or input, and it should be individualizing what it comes back with for you based on your interests in the way that works for you. There's no point in it responding to my daughter with lots of text she doesn't know how to read, but visuals, photos, things like that, she can. So it needs to adapt to what works for her. So that led me to thinking this is how things really need to be. It needs to be something that you feel in control over and that it learns from you. You can use it in whichever way works for you in terms of if you're a visual thinker or you're not able to perhaps use your hands or speak, whatever. It needs to be very adaptive around your needs in that way. And it ideally it's something that could follow you in different ways across life because things change all the time. There's my daughter, for instance, needs to go and learn, then she needs to learn how to go to the community, learn vocational things. So it needs to be able to follow you across different situations in a way and make them somehow more inclusive for you. I'd like to see more sensory things and things that can help adjust the environment around you to help as you move through it, in time. So those are just a few thoughts. I have more thoughts about what inclusive tech should look and feel like, but effectively it should respond to you. It should adapt very well to your needs. It should learn from you so it can anticipate when you've got a need and that it knows what you're expressing in your way. It knows your language, and ideally in time it should be something that so we can be talking about something you can carry that's connected elsewhere, but also in time, there could be things like smart homes and other things that could adjust the environment for you if needed and automate this. Um, so those are, I know it sounds a bit abstract because it can be actually implemented in so many different ways. But first of all, those are the principles, let's say, that um, any tech, any tech that helps people should operate.
Oh, you have said a lot that I have like a whole lot of follow back on questions and like what can you say are the next steps we should take, like, or the next steps maybe the big tech could take to like achieve, even if it is just like an aspect of these needs?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I mean, there's um obviously everybody kind of, including big tech, all sort of subscribe to all sorts of inclusive research and design, I guess. I still think there are a lot of blind points for all of them, um, in that it's very hard for them to break out of some of their mindsets I spoke about earlier, being challenged by whole new ways, different ways of thinking that weren't considered beforehand. Um, and I think that what they could do is support those who want to create this tech coming at it, excuse me, from this lived experience way where they know the audiences, they experience it themselves, and they want to actually get involved in designing some of the tech themselves. Um, and some of this can serve as a model, as a way of learning for the big tech. Um, and also, they could help foster an ecosystem of lots of smaller startups that are working on different areas that they know much better than, say, Google or Microsoft, and um, and then learn from that. So, I mean, I know Google has been doing some things recently in Africa to support some of um, the sort of collecting of different sorts of voices and dialects that are less known to these voice activated devices. And there are examples like this where they could, really bring their resources to help with this investigation, um, and allow people to actually get on with doing some of this themselves in the way they know best. So that's important too, is to allow them some autonomy in doing this, whether it's collecting data sets of different voices, or it's supporting an ecosystem of startups run by maybe different disabled founders who want to do something for people like them. And I think everyone can benefit, because what happens is that, and we know this, when you design, harkening back to designing from the margins, when you do that, often it benefits everybody in the middle. So Sometimes they call it the donut theory or the cut curb theory. So what that means is that if it's a donut and you aim for the edges of the donut, you could get some innovation that would then equally benefit everyone right across the middle of the donut as well. Everybody um, benefits, and therefore um, it should be seen as something that could support the needs of the market for these big tech people. You know, if they think about there's a big market of people that is larger than they realize who need tech in different ways, but also that it could benefit all their existing customers if they did some innovation on the edges like this. So that's those are a couple of ways, and certainly we want to see the idea of co-production being a true end-to-end process, not a nice to have add-on for testing at the end. You know, it should be right from the beginning and end to end working together. Um, because that means things that are not going to work are caught much earlier, and that would save lots of time and money for everybody if you could do it sooner rather than at the end. So end-to-end co-production, as I say, but also again to support lots of smaller startups to just have their ideas and lived experienced startups be able to sort of get stuck in themselves and have that ability. The problem is that many of them struggle to access funding and resources in the same way as other startups. It's already a hugely competitive thing, and it's often driven by money, growth, profits, and it's not thinking enough about impact, as a balancing factor. Why not consider the impact you can make, not only the money you can make? We need to kind of change that scenario a lot more, because if you impact people's lives in a good way, um, they will be very loyal, and you are going to achieve much more than just making money out of a big mainstream mass where you don't distinguish yourself from anyone else. You're just one of those big tech companies. So there are lots of things that need to sort of come out like this. And I just want to mention that um, we did a there needs to be other ways for them to understand the differences. And one way might be, we had an event at London Tech Week which was called "Why Tech Fails Neurodivergent and Disabled People," and we used this theory called self-determination. So it's a well-known theory around the core needs in life for people. And I mean, there are quite a few others, but what it means is that you could break it down into autonomy. So self-determination is about being able to increase the feeling of autonomy, that you're more in control of your life, and this is serving you. And another is competence. So this tech um, suits what you feel comfortable with in terms of abilities or skills, or it might stretch you enough to learn more. But it shouldn't be something that's just impossible to learn or use because that can reflect back on you and it can make you feel stupid or something. So the feeling of competence should be another one that is about making tech easy easy enough to use for whoever needs to use it. It doesn't just mean making it usable by everyone, but that they feel in control over it. And it doesn't get in the way of what they really want to do. And then, as I said, the third one was around um, relatedness, actually. So this is a sense that there are others like you, and you can establish relationships with other people you know or that are like you. You're not alone. There are others you can relate to because often you may feel very alone around people who aren't like you. And it's important to have a bigger context, and this relatedness is important too, the social aspects, let's say. So we use those three things as a way of judging which tech increased it or decreased any of these elements, depending on your needs. And it helps serve as a benchmark for judging whether this is doing its job for us. Does it support our self-determination, our needs in terms of to be autonomous or etc. Um, it's not the only way, but it's an important one, and it's something that could also help reveal differences between people that need to be understood. So that tech has a job to, you know, allow everyone to be have self-determination. It's different for different people. And hopefully that's another way of creating this awareness, breaking through these mindsets, hopefully. You'll need to switch your microphone back on.
Talking about next steps, I am also planning to start an open data set for pattern speech, and the goal is to have different people from like in different regions speaking in their own this natural reading from stuttering, cluttering, but like we just want to start with that with that two first, then we scale from that. And ever since like I have been seeing most voice AI not capturing this particular need, and I just felt that okay, let me start up something and see how it scales, and maybe even like you said last time, make it to be like a DPG, digital public goods, and I feel that is the next step from like my own perspective to like have this pattern speech out there so that we can make tech accessible also. Um,
Oh,
so
that was part of my next answer. It's so funny. Digital public
uh,
goods. So we're going to talk about that. Yeah.
cool. What are like some biggest blind spots in the way we build and also research tech today when it comes to including everyone?
Yeah, a lot, as I say, is down to what I kind of touched on. The blind spots are like, why do this, and why it's important. And a lot of people are just not aware. They're not exposed to this, or they're not aware of these
Yeah.
needs. So, they have these blind spots through lack of awareness. but also um, there's some dressing up going on. There are all sorts of various inclusive type practices that are celebrated and so on, yet things still fail. As we found out when we were talking about self-determination. So that's because they might create these sort of inclusive approaches themselves without truly getting at the nature and cause of where others are coming from. As I mentioned before, sometimes they kind of see a kind of tip of the iceberg presented to them, but and they respond to that with some inclusive practices, but they're missing out the fact that this is just the tip of the iceberg and there's so much underneath that is where the true causes are. Um, this is something I use a lot in systems thinking because that's a way of trying to look at things more holistically and all the moving parts and how they affect each other, ending up in these various outcomes that you may not expect. And it's really important to actually cut through those obvious visible parts to the parts under the water, so to speak, that um, are where the real differences are. And so the trouble is that a lot of practices have been created without having really investigated deep enough and then learning from that. And as I say, they may be based on mistaken assumptions, for one. And of course, there are other problems as you touched on with AI. People think, well, just because it's AI, it's very special and magical and it knows so much and it's very smart. Yet it's only as good as the data you feed it with. If the data is just reflecting a lot of very typical people from few cultures, then um, that's not going to work. And it's not very obvious because all this data gets obscured. Again, it's all behind, say, the face of a chatbot or something that you might want to speak to, yet it doesn't understand your voice because it wasn't trained for your voice. It was trained for other voices. And that's all that data that's way down behind the scenes. So all those spots about truly thinking about representative data and making sure it's part of the whole that you get if you're dealing with something like AI. Obviously, besides that, it's about how you are processing this data, the tools you use, and are you using them to properly allow for other people's voices to come through or not? How do you prioritize and weight all these things? And then at the very end, you know, what what is it trained to recognize as a voice? All these three things add up to a bad experience unless they're all done well. And so it does start with, just like you say, um, representative data and and then scaling from there. And of course, different sorts of speech are coming from many different causes. So as you say, stuttering or the way my daughter has sounds, they're coming from different things. There are different needs involved, but what people hear is something they're not able to understand. So there's a lot to work on in this space. I think also not just the data, but being able to then interpret the meaning of people's atypical speech um, in a way that works for them and not for others. That's a huge challenge. There's a lot of work I'm trying to focus on in terms of how do you interpret meaning from um, you know people's recordings, let's say, that uh, express themselves differently. I'm trying to do this with people like my daughter by um, obviously knowing a lot of where this comes from, knowing the patterns and what they mean, because the patterns of the way you express yourself um, have a meaning in themselves. They're all part of communication. So my daughter will communicate through different types of sounds, gestures, body language, movements, and there are patterns to these. And I'd like to specifically use only, representative data, just like you're saying, to train something around those patterns that are going to be more closer to those people. And I think it's the same across the board. Anyone who communicates differently um, needs to have the right to be heard in whichever way. So you need to allow them to. You can't get people like my daughter to fill in a form and do research like this. You need to spend time, record her with video, understand why this is going on. You can't do things in a way that, say, user experience researchers might normally do by asking people questions. That's not going to work if there's a gap. So you need to adjust that to give those people a chance. But I think we can do that now by not just understanding this, but also using tech itself to help us in understanding people's views. As I said, we can record people's, um, voices, sounds, and visuals, and then train AI to find those unique patterns that are different and represent that in a new meaning about what they're expressing. And I think we have a lot of possibilities now, but they need to be applied to this area. And the problem is not enough people are doing that because it's too much of a challenge or they think it's too costly. But I think we can find ways to convince many others that obviously a need for this, and there may be different ways to secure funding, perhaps, for these sorts of things that prioritize impact, you know, the impact of listening to people who weren't listened to, for instance. So there are a lot of, we have to kind of demonstrate, we have to think differently about this and give it its importance.
Um, Totally. And I listen, believe that we are facing these issues because innovation often starts from a top down. But then what happens when we flip the script? Like when we shift the empower to people with lived experiences for them to build this products and like from their experiences to like understand the particular needs and how to go about it.
Yeah, it's never easy anywhere, of course, we just said, we've spoken about, these mindsets that people have that are difficult to cut through in terms of awareness and opening up. Um, so there is a lot of work to be done there, but I think still I think I mentioned too, if we can find ways to really make this much more community and grassroots led, um, there's a lot there that could then be shown as evidence of the need and what could be done, which could then help with scaling this further from the top down. So we probably need to start with the bottom up. And that's about being able to sort of organize, have access to um, people and tools and things that allow us to explore these ideas to a point to show that here is some evidence of what we've done so far. Excuse me. It could be like a prototype or early stage to just enough that it's not too much, too costly, but it's enough to demonstrate, look, with only this small budget or a few people in this community, a few people who happen to know around tech and research or whatever, we were able to um, gather this data. We were able to create some very rough early prototypes that we were able to test and get some valuable feedback on, enough to show, to demonstrate there's some value here. So, then the top down at a point needs to recognize what's been done here and this value, and help scale it further. So one example might be I just finished submitting a nomination for a friend of mine in Spain who works with disaster recovery, and we met at the Zero Project conference at the UN in Vienna, and this is every year, and they celebrate innovation in disability, for instance, and they don't actually give money out and all this. The main thing is that if they celebrate projects that have done enough to demonstrate some real value and evidence, and then they amplify it to all the decision makers, whether they're in government or their foundations or whatever, and who could then be interested in supporting this further. So, but it's always about grassroots groups around the world who've taken it upon themselves to start somewhere. It might not even use tech to begin with. Or it might be very, very low tech, but you could demonstrate what the purpose is. And so, you know, I'm hoping that there's a few other examples like this that could help get this onto the table. And then to your point around, and I'm going to jump ahead quickly, to this digital diversity living lab idea. This is just early stage. It hasn't really properly started, but we've now initiated a few events around inclusive design, which was shared in Athens for ethical AI and at London Tech Week. And um, I got very excited about with speaking to people from different parts of the world around the notion of the digital public goods. So it's something that's endorsed by the UN, and it fits in with my intention to not build tech as a proprietary commercial only thing to make lots of money, but the idea of open source technology, which is technology that's open enough for others to contribute to or to use in whichever way they wish to. So it's a very open process a lot of transparency. And the way a lot of these projects work is that they're all done online. You can post up, here's our code so far, this is our direction or goals. And for instance, it might be to build an AI model that could be an agent for people with atypical speech. So we could hopefully get contributions to this from experts in this around the world, or also contributions from people from different parts of the world where there are different infrastructures, so that these things could be accessible not only to, say, the disability needs of a person, but also their environment, their culture that they're in, etc. Like ideally, it's accessible across all these different levels, that it could be done at a at an affordable way, that it could work in Southeast Asia or Africa without the huge bandwidth you might have in Germany. Like if you build in one place, it should deliver in another. So the idea would be and I spoke to somebody who's very interested in this from Vietnam, and who had experienced these things where they built something that just didn't work there. So, that notion is really important, that it's transnational, transcultural, it's accessible across these and different infrastructures, as well as people's own needs, if you like. And so there's some good criterion guidelines for this. And it's something I hope we can do more to promote as well as something that, say, governments and foundations and others should be aware of and want to support, for instance. So yeah, it's a very good example. Oh, sorry, your microphone again.
Also, we often talk about accessibility, inclusion, but how do we push beyond checklists and into real design and long-term inclusion?
Yeah, of course, it's you know, the checklists come from, putting down some compliance standards that act as a sort of stick, for tech companies to adhere to. Um, so that has a role to play, um, because sometimes you do have to make it quite clear what you need to do, so you can't like avoid it. And that if you don't do it, you're not doing things correctly and you could face a lot of penalties. So there's some um, there are some cases for this, but of course it's not enough, because yes, you're right. It gets if that's all there is, like you just have to meet this compliance for the EU or this compliance in the United States. Um, Tick, 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 that's it. Which does nothing, because you're not doing it for those people, you're doing it for you. So those checklists are for tech companies. They're doing it for themselves so they don't get fined or go to prison. It's the wrong, it has its place, but it's the wrong approach, of course, isn't it? Because I mean, it's still being done for them, not for the people whom it should be accessible for. So there's something fundamentally wrong with that. The point is that it should be a positive thing, made. So I mentioned before, if you were to focus on the margins, there's every possibility that it will be innovative for everybody. And that tech company should be aware of that. It's a very positive strength. And that's not about checklists, that's about benefiting everyone. Um, the other is that there's yeah, there needs to be a drive because, well, sometimes you have to speak the language of the people. So, which is why I get involved with different things like government and business and so on, because I have to figure out what drives them and what's their language that we need to kind of reach them with, so they take things seriously. So let's say with business, then they will say, well, where's, you know, why should we be doing this? Where's the benefit, you know? And in business speak, you should be talking about the numbers, the huge numbers involved in the disability market, for instance, in across the world. It's, much larger than anyone realizes as a market. And then, and that's something else probably underseen, but it's like demonstrating this is a very large market size. It's not a niche. So that could be one way to get business on board, as well as the fact that it gives them reputation, brand reputation, and loyalty because if people can trust them that they want to do the right thing for everybody, that's going to work right across all their customer base. So these are some things around speaking the language, whether it's business or government and so on, that turns these things into real strengths and incentives, so that it's not just down to a disincentive like checklists because you'll otherwise get a big penalty, but the reason why it should be done. Um, and I think that also with communities, building with them, as I touched on, there's you need to go to them to understand them and to work with them in their place to get, allow everyone to be able to be creative and in their confident space. And that's the part I would call like our living lab aspect, because that's about really how do people actually live and work and what does it look like? Because that's where they need to do these things. So we need to go into those and understand that properly. And that takes it also a lot further than just working at a distance with no knowledge of the people, but knowledge more about checklists rather than the people. Um, because the checklists are not, um, none of them can work on their own. You can't dissolve all this into a checklist. That how can you can't at all understand a complicated set of human beings from a checklist. That's a hugely generalized thing that will never accommodate everyone. So it can only ever be by building with communities, and as I say, in their place and probably so it reflects everything in which they live, because you have to think about the context as well as the people around them. And I think that there's a lot communities can start with if they've got that drive because they have that lived experience. They have a real need to maybe get involved in doing this in whichever way helps them. And I think that, the idea of remote working, the internet, and so many other things. There are a lot of ways now for everyone to be able to get involved. And from a community level, as I say, I related that to open source models because they're communities as well. They bring together people who are all interested in a certain project for different reasons and bring in all their different locations, cultures, expertise into it. So communities are essential, and I think they're the ones who can make the start in some way to get to that point where we can, um, show others the value. It's working with communities though is it, you do have to kind of be very transparent about what you know and what you don't know. I mean, I work with a lot of disabled people as part of Tech for Disability because it's pretty broad to disability in general. But I don't myself have lived experience of all those disabilities, of course. I know that we ultimately have end up with similar needs and issues, but how we get there is quite different. So we do need to take account of that. Um, there's a lot of ways to kind of find out what you might share in common. That's not always the same. Like for instance, subtitling, closed captions are things that were to benefit people that had more difficulty with hearing, but
Yeah.
they also benefit, say, autistic people who often need to see a kind of visual to really take in the information. So, all these things can go across disabilities, benefit other ones. But I think that having said all that, I think it's absolutely fine. I think we need to kind of form communities based around mutual needs and interests and then scale from there. So there's no reason why it can't be as small as it needs to be so that it's highly relevant to everyone is there. It could be I mentioned that in terms of stuttering, there is a very big research project done in China that was presented in Athens last week. Um, so that's like brought together a huge community in a very huge country, all around the same topic that stammering means we need to make this data more representative of people who stammer in Chinese. So, they got behind a very similar um, problem to solve. And I think that's a great starting point because you don't have to explain so much to each other. You get on with it. Um, it always helps to have others with them who might be able to share what they've learned elsewhere in other projects, even if the challenges they face might be different, as long as the goals are similar and also that we can think about that we treasure impact, we're there for that impact. It's not just about making money, it's changing lives. And for sure, it's thinking much longer term, for instance, too. If you want to talk about money, it's simply going to be long term, as opposed to this short term we're always looking at, which never allows to get down to the causes. So I think the it's reliant on that community level to come together with something really strong, but find allies that understand the concepts and maybe have some good resources or experience to share to benefit them.
Finally, finally. if you could pass one big message to the next wave of designers, technologists, or community builders working towards equity, what would you want them to know, feel, or do?
For sure. Obviously it depends on where they're all coming from, I guess, whether or not they've been exposed to this and feel that need or they're not, but they have, say, the expertise to help make things happen. I guess that's all dependent, but they need to feel that they're part of this larger power, like if they're all representing communities that are left out, and yet they have some access to something like technology, which could benefit so many people, have so much impact and power. It's important to realize that you can be part of that and to realize where you stand in that. There is no one person, it's really teamwork. But there's a very key part to play within that. So one is to realize you are part of this vast context with a lot of potential power. And the other is obviously, I think, some sense of humility in that no matter how much you think you already know, it's never going to be enough. You'll never know as much as what other people know. If you haven't faced it yourself, it's not just about expertise, it's about what you faced in life. No substitute for experience in life. So, um, you have to realize that all your assumptions, your way of looking at the world could be very limited because we're only human and we have very limited scope to understand everything. We have to rely on other people and listen to them in whatever ways we can. That's the only way we could do that. Your assumptions, your idea of what's good is really just contained within what you know to date. And you just need to be aware of that in order to be very open to the fact that other people are very different from you.
Muted again. Thank you. Thank you very much for this great insights. You have shared a whole lot of ideas, and I hope maybe just maybe tech gets better and better and even more inclusive for everyone. And do you have any question for me or any last thoughts?
I think that it would be great that we keep a good open exchange going on between us. As you can see, it doesn't really matter where we are located, etc. We can still exchange a lot about each other and where we are. And I'd love very much to know more on different places that where there's a lot of talent. I know there are lots of great startups, as I mentioned in Nigeria, for instance, just for one, but many others to connect up. So I think it would be great to find more ways that we stay connected up across levels of social change and tech and communities, because no one's going to do it alone. It needs to be in relation to many others. So I'd love to hear from more people there about you know the needs over there, the environment, the context for those needs, um, in order to be more aware of them, and also all the real strong points that should be brought to the surface more. The people working hard there who realize can realize social change like yourself, and also those who are, for instance, very skillful with expertise. You know, I just think it would be great to find more ways to keep this connected up and work jointly on projects like digital public goods, etc. So the question would be how we can stay connected and not just ourselves as people, but you know, the people we know and the places we're in. So it's a big question, but we'll
Yeah.
do some thinking about that because I think I'm sure there are lots of ways, you know, that could be done. It might be connecting you to somebody who's doing something very similar, like I mentioned in China, for instance, or what Google's doing in with the Global Disability Innovation Hub in Africa. Um, and also some of the charities that I know from here who are working all over Africa in terms of supporting digital activists. They're doing great jobs, but maybe we could help to connect them up with digital things as well to just to help serve people a little bit better. So I'm sure there are lots of things. So I just love to find a framework or some way to remain in contact and see where there might be some joint projects. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. When I get this information, I will surely share it with you. And
Great.
aside that, I don't have any question. I don't have any thoughts.
That's fine. I mean, if you know, it doesn't always have to be just within an immediate conversation. We're able
Yeah.
to ask questions afterwards by whichever way. So happy to do that. And it shouldn't just stop at one meeting and one event, but something, it turns into something
And
that's a little more ongoing, you know? So I'd love to find some way to do that. Maybe there's some online thing I could consider that to keep us working together ongoing.
surely. I am actually in contact with someone working on something similar to stuttering in Canada. So I can connect you with that with a connection so that the communication continues to flow. Then when I get to see anyone new in the accessibility space, definitely
Yeah, that would
I'll
be
feel the
great. I
connection.
think lots of, at the very least, let's do some sharing like that because we're always meeting different people. As I mentioned,
Yeah.
I will hear about this in Africa and in Nigeria, and coincidentally, I was born in Canada, so you know, so it's good to know about that too. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's that's something now I'm much more interested in is at that level to be able to do more exchange. Maybe we can build some sort of online community to kind of keep this going somehow.
Oh, funny enough, like the person is actually trying to build something like that, like a Discord channel where different people talking about accessibility, stuttering. We all come in together to share ideas and like talk what works and what doesn't work and like just get to know what everyone is building so that we can grow from there. So yeah, I'll send that connection.
Yeah, that
Definitely.
would be good. I've been thinking about that from here too. For instance, trying to build a community to kind of bring together people, you know, say disabled people,
Yeah.
thinking about startups and but widening that too. So I'm able to host quite a few different things that might be like discussion forums or communities online that might help keep the conversations going. So let's see.
All right. Cool. Let's chat later.
Okay.
Thank you very much for making the time to
Yeah,
join. yeah, to join me in this call and also sharing your insights. It's been so amazing so far. And
Yeah, pleasure. It's
definitely
part of the
definitely
process. It never stops changing, by the way. So no problem. Um, and yeah, happy to help out and keep me posted how I can help you with putting together whatever material you need to do and getting it out there. Let me know how you're going to be planning to do that. You know, how you want to, I don't know, if
yeah.
you publish online or something, let me know. Uh, if there's any help needed there or just sharing or amplifying this, so be happy.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Okay. And I hope we can catch up again later on if you're around in the summer or, but see how it goes. Yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
Um,
Have it.
I'll make sure all this gets shared to you anyway, via the link to the
All
club.
right.
Okay.
Can you stop the listen recording? So just
Let me
all
stop that.
right. Thank you very much.